We'll wait. We'll wait. Welcome to the inaugural meeting of IANABIS. I am your local chair, Murray Kutrawi, formerly an AD, as of about, I don't know, almost 24 hours ago. And with me remotely is Ted Hardy. There he is.
Also formerly an AD, but a lot longer ago.
That's true. That's true. Do you have your, yes, thank you. Ted will drive. Please note the note well. Those of you who have seen it, I'm sure you've seen it. Those of you who have not, please familiarize yourself with these points and especially with the documents at the bottom. They describe your obligations and ours with respect to participation in the IETF. Next, please. Do we normally read these things these days, or is this more of a...
It's just important for us to all recognize that we're here to treat each other professionally, and that it's important for everybody to understand that maintaining an environment with dignity, decency, and respect is an important part of that professional environment. I think given we're Thursday, you probably have all seen this many times by now. Do recall that this meeting is being recorded and will be public on YouTube. Here's the agenda for today. Murray, you want to take it back?
Sure. Are there any bashes for the agenda? We'll be doing a brief charter review, just a couple of slides, and a lot of the rest is just, it will be discussion led mainly by our friends from IANA about what we're doing here and what we want to accomplish and how we're planning to get there, with a couple of additional drafts presented for, I think, is John doing both of them? Am I correct about that? Is John in yet?
That's the theory, but he has not yet joined the meeting, so hopefully he will join us.
He was in email core right before this, so he is or was away. Oh, there he is. John just came in. So John, you're up after about 15 or 20 minutes of intro stuff, and then we'll talk about interim meetings and other next steps.
No agenda bashing?
Nobody's jumping to the mic, no hands in the queue. So I guess we're good to go. So we wanted to go over briefly, these are all taken directly from the charter. I'd actually like to put Amanda or Sabrina or both on the spot to talk about, I got this list basically from you about stuff that you have accumulated over time, things that we want to tackle in a new version of 8126. So is there anything you want to say as we go through these about like where these came from, what you want to see here? I know you aren't prepared for this. During your part? Okay, that's fine. One point that came up on the list recently is early allocation in scope for changing here, because the charter doesn't specifically name 7120 as being on the updating block, or I don't want to say chopping block, but I argued that it comes in under this fourth bullet, which is why I bolded it. So it doesn't actually say 7120 is up for it, but I think it fits in under this. And I haven't heard any objection to that line of thinking. So I think I think we're okay there.
And in fact, Roman, our current AD, has confirmed that.
Okay. So then just by way of refresher, this, the camera's just changed. I guess that's normal. These are five of the, and the next slide is the remaining batch of things that we hope to tackle in this working group with a revision to BCP 26, I think it is. Here we go. That last one is near and dear to my heart. So if we're going to do these in line, then we don't have to do the charter review now. Do you have the next deck lined up? Paul isn't Paul, wherever he is.
Hi, this is Paul Hoffman. I'm not sure, were we in charter review or were we in agenda bash?
We were finishing charter review.
Okay, so I appreciate that the AD said, because of the sentence you saw there, that 7120 could be in scope. I would like to point out, just because things get messy over time, the last sentence of the third paragraph of the charter says, this is the only expected output of the working group.
So is the question, are we allowed to output one document?
No, the question is, are we allowed to skip over that sentence and output two documents? Or do we have to shove the two documents together or something? Or do we just do a very quick charter change to remove that sentence?
So Roman,
Our AD is at the mic.
Hi, I'm at the mic. Roman, as the responsible AD. Yes, we should have been a little cleaner and kind of tighter when we thought about things through the charter. From my perspective, I'm looking at things as BCP 26. It's a BCP. You can hang lots of documents into it, and I'm focused on we're making updates to BCP 26, which is a long-winded way of saying is perhaps the answer is multiple documents, despite the fact that maybe we were a little too precise about the solution space of saying something kind of BIS. So to me, if it makes sense to have multiple documents to cover it, it makes more progress. And as long as we all hang them under BCP 26, let's do that. If it turns out that that complicates our life too much, I am open to having kind of a conversation about what makes sense. So that might be a recharter or kind of another squint. So let's kind of find out where we have a problem. But yeah, let's proceed with multiple documents.
Great, that sounds fine. We can even start doing 7120 BIS and then decide how does that fit in.
I'm happy to spin up a very tiny recharter that's, okay. I'll work with Roman on it.
Great, thanks.
Sure. Harold.
Harald Alvestrom. I noticed the charter looks like a shopping list of things to consider. But one thing it starts out with, for example, but one thing that wasn't on the list, there was actually one of my pain points, which is maintenance of registrations where the original registrant, whether it's a working group or a person or a company, has long since disappeared, and we need to update the registration to fit with current templates or because it's simply wrong. Is that within scope?
If I were the one interpreting the charter, which I am not anymore necessarily, I would say that since we used words like, for example, and include, it's not closed, it's not a closed thing. Yes, we could include that in here. If this is something that, especially if this is something that has come up routinely for IANA before and something that they feel like needs fixing, then let's do it.
Thank you.
Barry.
This is Barry Liba. And on that question, I'll go back to when we did 8126, that all of that kind of stuff was certainly in scope at that time. And I think by extension, it should be in scope this time. It's all how you deal with the IANA considerations and making sure that the IANA registries are up to date.
Okay. Amanda.
do you want to use the clicker in the room, Amanda?
Sorry.
Okay.
Do you want to pull down?
Use that. Okay. I'm Amanda Baber with IANA. Not tall enough yet. And I'm really just going to be reading notes off my phone so that I don't collapse. So IANA started in 8126 BIS. Click. Where do I click? Roughly speaking, this document covers sort of two sets of concerns. There's what we consider kind of IANA's part, which is how to write an IANA consideration section so that it's complete. We understand it. Other readers can find what they're looking for and understand what was done maybe years earlier. Then there's material we can advise on in terms of logistics, but the community needs to talk it through. And that generally, we think, falls under the heading of how to get content into a registry or keep it out. Defining common sense of registration procedures, what makes for a valid spec, who can make certain kinds of changes to a registry under what circumstances. So we've started addressing notes and questions to IANABIS within the document, which I'll get to in a minute. I'm so sibilant. First, what we think of as the administrative stuff. 8126 already links to this help page on our website. It's kind of an updatable adjunct to 8126. It's meant to be like a quick reference for authors. sort of addressing common issues that come up during our last call reviews, and especially during the sort of mass reviews we perform just before IETF meetings. Like last week, we reviewed about 500 IANA consideration sections, and you find out very quickly or are reminded very quickly that there's certain things we need to find a better way to communicate or to communicate at all. So we're incorporating small pieces of information throughout the document and also into a checklist that's already present at the beginning of the document. Kind of our organizational challenge is that we haven't really taken up yet is just to make these sort of just plain writing instructions easier to find. Probably we may need to be more prescriptive, probably supply more boilerplate, although it's possible that our website might be more of a place for that. There is one set of terms we're defining in the document. In this registry organization section, 8126 pointed out that historically, people have sometimes used the terms registry and sub-registry interchangeably and use different words for collections of registries, but it stopped short of telling people which terms to actually use. I looked away, I deviated from the text. It is a terrible problem. We're defining the terms registry and registry group, and we're reserving sub-registry for when you need to indicate a relationship between a registration like error code 1 and a registry for it like subcodes for error code 1. And there's just so much like this. We've added some text that's meant to make sure new actions are clear in a BIS document, that registration instructions from the original document don't get lost, even if you don't want to reproduce the original section. We get asked how to write expert review mailing list instructions a lot, so we've listed some points that need to be covered, added some request handling suggestions. Next slide. Did I do it? Yeah.
Yep, you did.
I'm going to look every time. Information about what the ISG can do or has to do is scattered around the document. So we added a section that just sort of consists of pointers. We started a section that's kind of best practices or suggestions for registry design. There's well over 3,000 registries, and people who mostly work with a few of them aren't always aware of features or approaches that other authors are using, which might just be a status field or a recommended field or posting template files. Also, a process item, 8126 currently recommends including a change controller field for first come, first serve and expert review registries. And having talked to the ISG in the past, we're just going to start adding that field, whether the document that creates the registry remembers to do so or not. We also want to do this for specification required registries because while in many registries those specs are RFCs or they're coming from well-known standards organizations, in some registries all that's kind of required from a spec is that it just sort of be helpful. And so maybe it'll be a web page or something on GitHub, and then you really need the change controller. Boy, that's
worked.
off the screen.
It worked.
Okay, no, I was just noticing. Sorry. So this leads to a set of questions for the IETF about specs and possibly what a valid spec is. Specification required requires approval by a designated expert, which people aren't always aware of. And there's probably a lot for people to unpack in the requirement that the values and their meanings must be documented in a permanent and readily available public specification in sufficient detail so that interoperability between independent implementations is possible. Should all that continue to exist or be refined? So one recurring question is whether an ID counts as permanent and readily available. Some experts say yes, at least one RFC says yes, but I'd like to point out here that if it is decided that you cannot use an ID for permanent specification required registration, you can still get an early allocation via RFC 7120 if the chairs and AD and expert all agree. You could ask whether any spec is permanent. One thought we've had but not really explored is that potentially IANA could store snapshots of specs, ask requesters whether we could have the right to republish if it becomes unavailable, if the community wants us to look into that. And speaking of public availability, and also not in the document yet, do people have an issue with, for example, allowing specs you have to pay to access if they provide a review copy for the expert? And we see this in media types very occasionally in other registries. Also, another question in the document, would it be useful or even really possible to define levels of specification required? A lot of considerations here. For example, if you require a standards organization document, who decides what a standards org is and how do they decide? And a few registration procedures, partly other people are going to cover. If a spec needs any kind of content review, you need to use specification required and have an expert do it, because we won't know if there's something off about the content. Getting an expert, sending to an expert, having them look at it is kind of maybe more overhead than is needed sometimes. If you want a spec that just exists, a URL that resolves, maybe you want a kind of registration procedure like first come, first served with URL. Or maybe that's a specification required tier if you can signal somehow that the other tiers still do need that expert review. Let's see, Karsten's documenting a category of procedures where you add a mandatory expert review to a procedure that also requires an RFC. 8126 allows this, but it doesn't describe it or provide names for the different combinations. We are doing this already. Right now, there's about 80 registries that have a procedure like this, and we do want to get some standard names for these into 8126 BIS. John Clenson's proposing a sort of two-tier set of procedures, a kind of first come, first serve option, or one that involves an IETF review. And one thing I can note here, and I don't know how much of the point this speaks to, is that while it's easy to indicate tiers of value by setting different registration procedures when you're allocating values, say 0 to 15 or standards action, 16 and up or less strict, there aren't currently many ways to do this with the registry of strings. You can make the tiers apparent like in the string itself somehow, like by including a prefix for vendor tree registrations, or you add a status field to the registry where you describe them as provisional or permanent, which 8126 does cover, but which I understand may not always be appropriate. Or you can simply create two different registries, like one for the IETF, one for other. So possibly something to look at there. And one more note we've addressed to the group that I'm not forgetting. If we're recommending that people think about using a status field, should the group also define a common but not exclusive set of possible states? Like, is it in scope to define deprecated and obsolete? Does it matter that they're already in use? And so early allocation is actually going to be a pair of documents. For 7120 BIS, the only change to the procedure after talking to chairs who use it a lot and to the ISG is that we're proposing that the term of early allocation be extended from 1 year before you have to renew to 2 years before you have to renew. In practice, we found that early allocations often require many renewals. Besides that, we're just filling missing process information, describing what we already do. We track expiration dates, we initiate renewals when the registry in question uses specification required or with expert review. We reach out to the expert after we receive a request from the chairs. And this is sort of dictated by logic because we would eventually have to send a review request to the expert anyway at IETF last call, so it would not be great to have them object to something that's already in the registry. So we're just making it clear here that while the chair has to get AD approval, we'll get expert approval. The new thing that we're writing is a document that would allow for early registry creation. There's demand for this in working groups that have a document that creates a registry and then several other documents that need allocations from it. Right now they have to track these things in wikis or on GitHub. This could also be an option for groups that are creating a registry that an outside organization needs allocations from. The approval and renewal process would probably be the same as 7120. The registries would be marked with expiration dates themselves. The new consideration we're aware of so far is that they need special registration procedures during this early period, essentially for registries that are going to have a strict registration procedure once they become permanent. You need to use an early allocation process to get an assignment. For registries that are projected to eventually have a lower bar to entry, like first come, first serve or expert review, we'd have the working group chairs approved during this period instead, which the working group chairs think sounds okay, the ones we've talked to. So if IANABIS would like to kick the tires on this once we have some text, that would be much appreciated because logistically it sounds okay so far. But and of course we'd like to get these two out like as soon as we can. And that's it, I think.
Okay. Any questions on any of those?
You have Sue Harrison in queue.
Yeah, so here's.
Am I hearable? Okay. Back one slide. Thank you, Amanda, for all this work. Let me go back to slide 4 and then comment on slide 5. Slide 4. Good. Specification required. One of the problems we've had with specification required is that if you put an accessible document with a URL, we've had those go to dev null after a while, especially if they're in companies. The BGP registries have found that to be a problem, and the working group has come back saying, I want to have a place where I know I've got a long-term space for this document. So should IANA store republish unavailable specs, it would help by working group, or we need something that says even internet drafts which go to a sort of in-between state be used. That's comment 1. Comment 2 is on slide 5. Slide 5 says early allocation to 2 years. Yes, IDR is one of those few working groups that requires 2 implementations. So we have early allocations that may last more than 2 years. So has there been any upper limit for those early allocations? Right now, there is something unless you have to go to the ISG. We've been able to successfully ask for additional time. Third
That's-
question, and so Amanda, you and I know how that goes, but I once we set up these early allocations, last point, which is a third comment. Thank you for the early registry. As you know, I've been struggling with the fact that this early registry creation does not have it does not exist right now. So thank you very much, Amanda. I hope all those comments were understandable.
Yes, on the middle one, early allocations, we have a few that I think go back as far as 2017. There is no upper limit built in on how many times you can renew.
Thank you. That's what we have now, and I would like to see that we have some mechanism. We do review those continuously and ping on the documents, but sometimes we get a single implementation and we wait a year or two beyond that to get the second implementation or to get the documentation forward. Again, thank you, Amanda. Your work here has been excellent.
Thanks.
Any other feedback? Oh, you have more slides?
No, I don't.
Oh, okay.
That's it.
I had a point just about these two. Is there any reason we should not start a call for adoption on the 2 documents IANA has provided as starting points for this work? I see 1 thumbs up. Is there any reason we shouldn't do that? The quietest room all week. Okay. What's next?
Does it involve me leaving?
What's that?
I said, can I go?
Do you have the next thing as well? No?
No, that's all me.
Great, thanks. Is John next, Ted?
Yes.
I'll revoke these slides. Where is? Oh, yeah, thank you.
John, do you want me to pass you slide control?
No, if you want to go ahead and run them, that's fine.
Okay.
This first slide is about a question or suggestion of text that I think belongs of an issue that I think this document needs to address. which is that there has been confusion in recent years between the historical role of IANA as a highly skilled organizer and curator of assignments and registered information, more expert in that subject than much of the IETF, with the dividing line between the IETF making technical decisions and decisions about approval models, but the IANA making decisions about how to organize things and curation best practices. We have been evolving in recent years toward what might be dramatically described as a clerical function, in which the IETF is responsible for all the details. Not clear whether there's a middle ground there or what it would look like, but I think it's important as we work on 8126 bis that this be clarified by this working group in that explicit document. That's topic number one. Next slide. These are three independent issues really to help get the working group focused on what the working group ought to be doing or not. Second issue, again derived from experience, is just what we mean by the designated expert role. 8126, and most of the history, talks about the expert as a evaluator of proposed new registrations. And nothing in Carson's document, which we'll get to in a minute, changes that. But when decisions come along about registry organization, relationships among registries and things like that, that may be different. And an important question is whether that requires different expertise than the expertise for which experts are appointed, and questions of open process, if the experts are making those decisions or are effectively making those decisions, whether they do this as advice to IANA or response to IANA questions or not. So the question, which I believe needs clarification, is whether designated an expert is the ISG and delegating authority over the organization of the registry and similar issues, or whether it is just about authority about proposed registrations. And I don't know the answer about the difference between different registries, but I think it's an issue which experience has suggested we ought to sort out. Next slide. Amanda covered this, so let me very briefly review. Two policies were proposed long enough ago that they were presented in IETF 120. One of them is covered by Carson's document, which she mentioned, adding a provision for expert review along with other mechanisms to get those expert perspectives into the system, whatever the other mechanisms are. There's also some modifications, 7120 there, which is why that issue came up. The other one, which is derived from some work we did in email core on 5321 bis, which is that we have a tension with registration procedures. At the one extreme, we'd like to have community input on those things, and in some cases, community consensus on them, because that's a good thing. And most of the procedures from expert review up through standards required, standardization required, are instances of that, of forcing that kind of review. At the other extreme, we really want to have registrations that alert people to the fact that a name or number is in use, so we don't end up with conflicts, and that calls for as minimum a registration threshold and procedure and barriers as possible. The conclusion that the email core came to was that in at least those cases, it was important to give the registrant choice, the intended registrant choice, between what is essentially a first come first serve policy and something else at a fairly high level of community input and approval. Both of these documents evolved from actual experience and actual working groups. These are not made up fantasies. And as Amanda pointed out, they can be and were incorporated into actual documents as special additional cases. But the proposal is that these belong in 8126 bis as additional well-known policy options. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Barry, you're up.
Yep.
Would you go back to the beginning of the presentation? This is Barry Leva. So these comments come from when I was an area director and things that I had to deal with at the time. As to IANA's role, there's a lot of variability in how people write up their IANA Considerations sections. Some of these come from copying from documents that were around way back when dinosaurs roamed the earth and the IANA function was done by people with less professionalism and experience than what we have now. So some of them are very detailed in telling them how to run the expert review process and little details of how many weeks to wait and things like that. So I want to make sure that we're very clear in this document, this update, that we should let IANA do the things that they are used to doing, that they're good at doing. And I prefer to lean more toward the top of the slide than the bottom in that regard. So next slide, please.
Barry, just to interrupt, I don't have a strong preference among those options as long as we figure out what we want, we're clear about it.
Understood. And like I said, my preference is to let them do what they're good at and not try to micromanage that part of it. So it's the second slide, please. I need it to remind me what, yes. Right. The other bit about this is there's a tension. I would often see designated expert set up with IETF consensus documents. And so something that comes in an IETF consensus document is registering in an expert review or specification required registry. And we have set it up that way, setting it up that way allows the designated expert to override IETF consensus. And this came up in the IASG many times. An area director cannot say no to a document. The designated expert theoretically can. And so I think we ought to try to address that here and figure out what we really want to do. My thought on what we might want to do is say that that in the case of an IETF stream, of a standards track at least, document that's getting IETF consensus is the designated expert has a say in that consensus, but does not control the entry to the registry. And certainly the IASG would do well to pay attention to the designated expert, but ultimately the IETF consensus has to win. And I don't think I had a comment on, could you go to the third one? I think I did not.
So before you go, this strongly interacts with Karsten's proposal.
Yes.
And is almost a different dimension of the problem than the problem which was addressed by the second slide.
Yep. Okay, anyway, thank you.
Eric Ecker.
Yeah. So I guess I'm like less enthusiastic about the sort of policy statement on this first slide. I think we can sort of muddle along on the way we have, rather than trying to have some sort of grand policy. And I think working groups have different opinions about how much they wish to like dictate to IANA. And I think that like by and large, you know, I think I guess I would say that it's helpful to have templates so people don't have to think very hard. And if people wish to defer everything to IANA, that's cool. But if people want to have strong opinions, I think that's fine too. And I guess I don't think that we need to have the working needs to take a position on this one or the other in a way that frankly I think will be quite difficult to resolve.
The problem, Ecker, is that we've had worked examples where people have tried to give a lot of discretion to IANA, and IANA has pushed back and asked for very specific instructions. And that's one of the motivations for asking for this to be clarified.
Well, I mean, then this becomes a question of perhaps of whether IANA is prepared to even do that under the circumstances. I mean, for us to dictate that they have to exercise discretion is a more difficult question. So in any case, I'm not enthusiastic about sort of trying to have this kind of broad policy statement in this document or document.
Ted?
As an individual, I just want to say, might the answer be different for different registries? I'm a hearty yes, the answer might be different for different registries, because there are definitely cases where the working group wants to say something about the organization of the registry and puts it in the document. And especially in those cases, creating a designated expert in addition shouldn't change the way the organization of the registry is. And a good example of this is in the URI registries, where the difference between how you register provisionals versus how you register permanent needs to be reflected in the registry itself. So the structure of the registry has to be able to show that distinction. I don't really think that means we're not giving IANA scope for action here. How exactly it gets done is kind of up to them. But for some of this, the working group actually set part of the structure, and we have to be careful to acknowledge that. So I think it will be different for different registries. And I think what maybe this group can do is look for those opportunities like the ones Amanda called out in her thing, where adding things like a change controller consistently, even if the document doesn't roll out a change controller, we might be looking here to, when a designated expert is part of the registry policy, add a field that suggests that they indicate at that point whether the designated expert does or does not have the ability to influence the structure, or should not take on more than a participant's role in that.
Paul Hoffman.
So, hi, John. This is one of those every 5 years where you and I agree. But we agree on something that I think is going to be very problematic, which is this working group working on an IANA document changes the way the IESG works with respect to some existing or even future registries. I agree that there are times where, I have seen times where the expert overextended themselves, overextended their power, did things that probably the working group didn't intend. I agree that the IESG should be able to step in, and hopefully with a lighter touch, short of throwing out the expert and finding a new one. But I do not believe this working group can actually change IESG action and policy here. I haven't thought about this enough to know how else I would like to do this. And it may be that since this document is an IETF document that has to be approved by the IESG might say, oh, that thing in section 5.6, which sort of puts us on the spot. Yeah, sure, no problem. And that would be fine. But I'm wary of us using an IANA document to change IESG behavior, even though I would like to see it happen.
I don't think changing what the IASG could do was either my intent or Carson's intent. So in that respect, I think we agree, and the question is how to pose that in any documentation. Again, with the stress on being certain this is clear rather than on what we do or what we don't do.
Barry.
This is Barry Lieba. It's sort of addressing both what Ecker and Ted said. Just to be clear, the intent of BCP 26 was always to provide guidance on how to get this stuff right and how to put it in the document so that we interact properly with IANA. It was never intended to be absolute rules that cannot be changed, that cannot be varied from. The bottom line on all of this is get it right, do what you need done. And if that means that what you need done is a little different from what this says, that's fine. And I hope that we continue that attitude as we update this.
Lars Eggert, no longer wearing any IETF dots. Excuse me. So I was on the ISG originally when we created the experts. And the reason was that before that, it was all with the ISG and that clearly didn't scale, right? And so we wrote down a process for how you could delegate some authority from the ISG to a group of people that knew probably more about the protocols than many of the ISG did. And that worked pretty well, and we're refining it. But I think we're not refining the underlying delegation of authority. And that to me means that, and I think we're all agreeing, that the ISG will continue to do whatever it needs, including overriding experts if they don't work. Because the ISG can also make the experts step down. Disappoint is not the word I was looking for. So dismiss is the word I'm looking for. Correct. So I think the ISG has and continues to have the ultimate authority over the standards process, and that includes how the registries for the protocols are managed. And that cannot be changed without touching 2026, in my opinion, which I hope we're not doing.
Susan.
Hi, is it my turn at this point?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is a real problem that I'm not sure that you're reading on or not, John. So we found in some of our registries that we needed to add information because we're getting a bit long in the tooth, things, we need more pieces of information, and these registries are covered by designated experts. We need, for example, to point that certain registry informations may apply to one AFI-SAFI versus another. So how do we go about to change the registry? We go through the working group and ISG, and that gets handed off to IANA. What do we do with the role of the expert who is handling that registry? Is that when we add information, is that grandfathered in? Does that have to be restated in the document? What sort of things are you trying to tell me about what we need to do here?
If what you're doing is going through changes to the registry, which are going through a working group process and an IETF, or even just IASG review process, this is irrelevant.
Okay.
The case that is of concern here is that someone in the community, possibly the expert, or IANA, because of some operational consideration, decides that some additional fields are needed in the registry, or some fields need to be redefined in some way. And in that circumstance, the question is, does that get worked out between the expert and IANA, by the expert with full authority because they're experts? Or does that require exposure to some sort of IETF public process?
Okay.
And
And
since in your case you're already exposing it to a public process, there's no issue here.
Okay. It would. Amanda's usually fairly good in some of those cases about for the registries I'm aware of definitely checking back with the working group as well as the designated expert. That's been a successful circumstance. Is and is this saving that wisdom for future registries?
If you're asking me if there are counterexamples as to how well that has worked, the answer would be yes.
Yes. Okay. So are you trying to codify that here, saying this is a good thing? I'm trying to boil this down to a list of problems I actually am dealing with and how we're working with it. So I've got a registry and it has a designated expert, and the designated expert says, oh yes, we should really have these extra fields. We're strongly suggesting they go back to the originating authority and say, you know, dear Mr. Working Group, dear Mr. ISG, please look over these additional fields. Is that the what's changing here?
If there's still a working group, then yes, exactly correct. If the working group is long gone, then as with many other things, it becomes a ISG problem. But if either of those principles is firmly established, then the concern here is met. At the same time, going back to, I think, Ted's earlier comment that this may differ from registry to registry, a second option is to specify on a per registry basis as new registries are created and figure out what to do about old ones. How much authority the expert in conjunction with IANA has to make changes like this without going back to the ISG or the working group.
Okay, thank you, John. Your answer was
really
as normal, clear.
Which is really a question for clarification, and an argument the clarification is important rather than a particular position.
I agree that the clarification is extremely important. Thank you, John.
That's the end of the queue. We have 13 minutes remaining. Was there you wanted to do Karsten's presentation as well, or was that folded into your earlier slides?
I think the last agreement I reached with Karsten was that the important thing was to get his document as well as my document, or my document as well as his document, onto the working group's agenda. And I think we've covered that.
Okay.
And Amanda's slides covered that, so I think we're covered.
Okay. Take it away, Ted.
Okay, obviously, the working group will do a lot of its work on the mailing list, but it did strike us that because we had such a short meeting at IETF 122, that we might want an interim virtual meeting between now and the Madrid meeting. So we wanted to throw that to discussion today. First of all, is there anybody who would object to having a virtual interim between now and the next IETF plenary meeting? John, your objection, please bring it in.
I object to the singular. I think given the importance of this work and the desire to make progress quickly, that what we should be doing now is scheduling a couple of interims between now and Madrid. And if we don't need one of them, we cancel it.
Okay, with that hopefully friendly.
Uh-oh. I'm on my own. Okay, you're back, Ted, I think. There was a blip there. It's 5 years later.
That's quite a blip. I'm glad my seat was still unoccupied. The question was, does anybody object to one or more virtual interims? Bob?
Hi, just a clarifying thing. All of these questions need to be asked on the list because you haven't done polls or anything, so.
I'm trying to start the calls, but the tracker's giving me grief.
Okay.
Yeah, we do have to do this all on the list, but having the sense of the room while we have the room is valuable, and that's what we're trying to get.
Is there any other feedback on interims? Okay, we have our input.
I would like people who have date ranges that they know that there are going to be blocks. For example, if the IANA folks are going to have a retreat and not be available, if there are date ranges where you're not going to be available and you're one of the folks likely to be interested in interim, please send those to me and Murray, and we will take those into account in trying to put together a schedule. If we're going to do more than one, I think probably we'll do the usual, let's find 2 hours at a time. Rather than trying to get a bigger block for a single one, just because that will be easier to schedule. But we will take that to the list.
Was that the only, you had 3 points on that slide?
Yep.
Which is not, oh, that is there. Sorry, it's not showing here all of a sudden. How much time do we need for what date range? Do we have what we need, I think? Just a couple between now and Madrid, I think was what I heard. That's it. No other input.
Well, if you want to do the in-room call for adoption, we can follow it up with the on-list call for adoption. But that would usually involve checking to see who's read the current document, who's willing to review revisions, and if there's anybody who has other documents they're asking us to consider. I think we already heard that from John. And
I'm setting up the poll for the first one right now. Actually, yeah, I'll just do one at a time. John.
That's the other question about the two existing documents, the Carson's and mine, which is whether we want to dismiss those altogether, take them as fodder for incorporation into the new 8126, or whether you want to treat them as separate documents. And I think Karsten and I are together indifferent to that answer, but we should answer that question relatively soon.
So I think for the ones that have comments that could be incorporated in 8126, the right thing for the working group to do is to bring them into 8126 bis. For the 7120, I think at this point, we probably want to keep that as separate and work with Roman to bring 7120 bis into BCP 26 rather than being a separate BCP of its own. Because that would make it easy for everything to find, but would make 7120 bis a separate document. That does require us to do a quick rechartering, but everybody seems to be copacetic with that.
Okay with you? Thumbs up.
Yeah, based on, that certainly works for me, and based on offline conversations, I believe it works for Karsten.
So I think what I'm doing is running a poll for each of the two proposed IANA documents. Is that right?
I thought you were doing 8126 bis, but if you've got another one in the queue.
No, sure. I was going to do both of, I'm doing an in-room poll for 8126 bis first, 7122nd, or do you want me to combine them?
I think we're just doing 8126 bis at this point.
I don't know where the 55 pages came from, but I didn't type that.
That's atypical.
Oh yes, that might have been an errant paste. There are 48 people in the room. We're already at 20. This is looking pretty solid. Seems to be flattening out. Okay. I think that's sufficient. That's very clearly yes. We'll do the second one. And thank you all, by the way, for this tour through the tracker tools. It's been so long since I used them. We had 27 total last time, 25. Not a single no for either one. So I think we have at least the in-room impression of what the answer is here.
I agree. So we'll take that to the list for confirmation and any other opinions that come up on the list. And we'll start planning for the virtual with the presumption that after these have been adopted, that those will be the primary work items. And Marie and I will work offline with Roman for figuring out the timing of the charter adjustment that we've all discussed.
Sounds good to me.
Is there anything else for the good of the order?
2 minutes of AOB. Roman.
I just wanted to come to the mic to thank everyone in the community that helped work on the charter to get us to this body of work that I feel like we've had some interest in for a couple of years. So, you know, we got across the finish line on that. So thank you for all that community engagement. And then I also wanted to thank both Ted and Murray for stepping up and to serve in this leadership role.
Cool. Mike.
Mike Jones. I do a lot of work in the IETF. I also do a lot of work that results in registrations elsewhere, the OpenID Foundation, W3C, et cetera. I just note in the discussions here, almost everything that people have said assumes that the change controller is the IESG or an IETF working group. And there's important cases where the change controller is another organization, typically another standards organization. And as we're thinking about our procedures, we should make sure that they still work in that case too, and that they're what we want.
I think that's a good point. And now I'm looking at Ori. Do you think we should maybe engage the liaison or someone from like W3C just to get their input into stuff like this?
That'd be appropriate.
Any others you can think of? No. Harold is going to the mic.
The other big one is ISO, possibly IEEE.
Okay. Three more minutes of AOB, or do you want those 3 minutes back? Ted, do we have anything else?
I think we're done for the day. Take your 3 minutes back and enjoy your evenings.
Thank you, everybody. Hi. Yep. You bet.
Hi, Ted, it's Roman. I just want to thank you for kicking it off for us here.
No worries. Happy to do it and looking forward to seeing everyone in Madrid. And of course, in the interims.